Core.
Your radio station for Forest Row, Crawley Down and Felbridge. It's got to be Meridian FM.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside.
Jimi Hendrix and Love or Confusion. Definitely confusion in the studio, just as we came out of the news. I do apologise about that, but looking at so many things here, I pressed the wrong bit, and hey, here we go. But we got there in the end. That's the main thing. I'm back after the 10 o'clock news now with Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, and we're doing our, we're looking back over the years at what's happened in November. So, Derek, take it away. Yeah. What's happened in November? I guess we're obviously starting with a bit of Hendrix happening in November.
That's right. I mean, that's from his first album, Are You Experienced? And on the 14th of November in 1967, Hendrix was on tour, his first headlining tour, UK tour, with Pink Floyd and The Nice. Now, seeing a tour like that nowadays would be interesting. And sadly, it was a time of change for Pink Floyd, because Syd Barrett, their guiding light, mentor, and the guy that really did everything, he was lead guitarist, wrote virtually all the material at that point. He got a little bit too heavily into the magic substances, and by this stage now he was starting to lose it. And on the same tour, as I said, was Nice, and their guitarist David O'List would actually stand in for Syd Barrett when he either had gone AWOL or he just wasn't really feeling up to getting on the stage. And that was the album that Hendrix had released. He released that in the May while they were on tour. I must just say, I bought that album. I always remember something sticking in your mind. I can remember the first time I heard it, I could not believe it.
And did you bought in 1967, did you?
Yeah, it had just come out, and I jumped on the bus to go about the couple of miles to the bass guitar. I was in a group at the time, drummer, and off to Buns' house. I had this album in my hand, and I remember getting that. You must listen to this. This is absolutely unbelievable. And that particular album sort of stayed in my memory as one of life's good albums.
I might have mentioned this before. I probably have. I've probably said everything once or twice. But one of you can't do this obviously now with downloads and CDs, etc. But I used to love, as about a 15-year-old, walking round with a bag that either said HMV or Virgin or even Smiths or whatever. But you knew inside it, because of the shape, was this album, and you just knew as you were walking along, you were just hoping that somebody would say to you, like, hey man, what's in the bag? What album have you got? Kind of thing. And you'd draw it out nice and slowly, and then you'd have the brand new copy and the latest of whatever it was at the time. And you just used to feel so good, especially when you say, "Wow, that's good. I didn't even know they had a new one out," kind of thing, you know. And you used to, it was what you can't do that anymore, can you?
No.
Oh, it's I'll email it to you. No, it's not the same. It's just not the same.
Words like Dropbox spring to mind.
Oh.
Happy days. But interesting enough, there was some good birthdays around then as well. Keith Emerson, who was the keyboard player with Nice for Emerson, Lake and Palmer, he was born in 1944 on the 2nd. And Rick Gretsch of Family, Blind Faith, Ginger Baker's Airport, he was born on the 1st in 46. The 6th was a good day. Trouser-splitting P.J. Proby and George Young, who was actually the older brother of AC/DC guitarists Angus and Malcolm. He founded the Easy Beats, Friday on My Mind, and also produced the early AC/DC albums. Singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell on the 7th, and Roy Wood, master of just about every instrument that's ever been invented, and probably some that haven't been invented yet. He was born on the 8th. But if we move to, it happened actually on this day today, the 17th, Johnny and the Moondogs, which is one of the names that the Beatles were going under on their way from nowhere to megastardom. Stuart Sutcliffe, who was their original bass guitarist and friend of John Lennon, was at the John Moore's exhibition with his painting, the called The Summer Painting. And it was, if you ever see it, it's easy enough to find a picture of it. It's in the abstract expressionism sort of mode. He sold that at the time to the organisers, actually, for £65, and it financed his Hofner President bass guitar. And the Beatles then had a bass guitarist. Bob Dylan was in the recording studios with Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet, and they recorded, amongst other things, a track called The Tiger, with a Y, and an interestingly sounding track called Vomit Express. And Ginsberg actually figures in Bob Dylan's life quite a bit. He can be seen in the video for Subterranean Homesick Blues. He sort of lurks. That's the one where he has the lyrics on cards and he's throwing them on the floor. You can actually see Ginsberg lurking in the background during the course of that particular video. And he joined Dylan again in the mid-70s for the Rolling Thunder Review. John Lennon released this in 1980 on the 17th. John Lennon released Double Fantasy, his last album, shortly before he died. And then there were some great birthdays. For anybody who's seen Jersey Boys, the name Bob Gaudio will probably be reasonably familiar as one of the guiding lights, well, the power behind the throne, really, of the Four Seasons. But he joined the Four Seasons. The Four Seasons were called the Four Lovers before they became the Four Seasons. And he joined around 1960, just as they were changing their name from the Four Lovers to the Four Seasons. But he had a hit in 1958 with his other band, for about 4 years, I think, the Royal Teens. And he had a hit with Short Shorts. Who wears short shorts? I wear short shorts, part of the lyric. What's interesting about that particular band is a 14-year-old Al Cooper was a guitarist with him. It was Al Cooper's first main gig. Might have been his first ever gig, basically, but 14 years old. I mean, he went on to an interesting career. Gene Clark was also born the 17th. He started out in the New Christie Minstrels. Not a popular band nowadays because they were recreating the minstrel tradition of the previous generations. But he was also an original bird. He was in the Jet Set and the Beefeaters. Beefeaters in the days when American bands were trying to sound British because of the British invasion. They couldn't get a look in. But they got a look in certainly when they changed their name to the Byrds. And he left after their Fifth Dimension album in '66. And interestingly enough, around that time, he was having an affair with Mamas and the Papas, Mama Mitchell, who was John Mitchell's wife. And the other three Mamas and the Papas decided that they no longer wanted Michelle to be part of the band. So they famously sent her a letter saying, please go away. And she was replaced by Mama Jill Gibson, who was, I can't remember the guy's name now, but he was the producer's girlfriend, their producer's girlfriend at the time. But she didn't last too long because the audiences didn't take to her and kept chanting, we want Mama Michelle, which must have been pretty disheartening. It says, by and large, that he left the Byrds amicably, but it's a coincidence that he left around the sort of March '66 and the affair was going on. Well, the first gig with Jill was the 1st of July. The final two birthdays that day. One is Martin Barr. He was he was the second guitarist. No, technically he was the fourth guitarist with Jethro Tull. The original guitarist, Mick Abrams, left after the first album, This Was, and he was replaced very, very briefly by Tony Iommi, who was in Earth at the time, who became Black Sabbath. But he was with them long enough for their famous appearance on the Rolling Stones' Rock'n'Roll Circus. I think it was about 1999 before that actually hit the DVD scene, because it was rumoured at the time that the Rolling Stones, who were producing the whole thing, thought they'd been outperformed by The Who. So it was being recorded as a television special, but it was never aired. And also John Glasgow. Well, John Glasgow died on the 17th in 1979. And he was previously with Chicken Shack and the original Gods, which featured Mick Taylor and Ken Hensley. What I just omitted to say, the other guitarist after Tony Iommi left, David O'List, who I just mentioned was in the Nice, he had a very, very short stint with Tull, but he left due to musical differences, and then, which means many things to many people. Then Martin Barr joined, and he'd been with them for decades.
I guess he's still with them, is he? If they're whenever they play.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's quite rare for someone like to stay that long in a band. What I've done, there is an album that they both feature on, songs from the Wood, and this next track, Fire at Midnight.
When you say both, who do you mean both?
Martin Barr, the guitarist, is the guitarist on it, and John Glasscock, the bass player. He's the bass player on this particular album, and this is Fire at Midnight.
How about that then? Jethro Tull. I don't play enough Jethro Tull.
Oh, it's brilliant. There is nobody quite like.
He's got the voice, hasn't he?
Distinctive, to say the least.
You just instantly, it doesn't matter what he could be singing the national anthem or a hymn or anything, and you instantly at least it's Ian Anderson, if nothing else.
It's Tull.
It's Tull, definitely. Let me just turn you up a little bit there. There you go.
Okay. Moving on to Rolling Stone magazine in America, that made its first appearance on the 9th in 1967. First issue had John Lennon on the cover. It had 24 pages and cost 25 cents. Donovan was their first interview. And
that must be worth a couple of bob now if you can get hold of that.
Oh, I should think so.
Yeah.
Very interesting. There's a note from the editor that suggests that the name comes from the old saying, "A Rolling Stone gathers no moss," which is where the idea came from. And they, in '69, had a famous hoax. They did this in their album reviews section. They said the Masked Marauders were about to release this album, and they did this real hoax review of it. And it proved to be so popular, they got so much comment about it, that Rolling Stone actually produced an album by the Masked Marauders. It was supposed to be a superstar album with Dylan, Jagger, John Paul and George, and it sold 55,000 copies before it was withdrawn. It was actually by a band called the Cleanliness and Godliness Skiffle Band, but it was some great hoax. They ran for about 2 years.
On what grounds was it withdrawn?
They just, Warner Brothers eventually it was out for about 2 years.
I see what you're saying. It ran out of steam. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. I wondered if, one of the aforementioned had sort of said, hang about. Oh.
No. I think everybody took it in good part. It's just that, your record buying public took this whole supergroup thing, hook, line and sinker. I mean, it's not difficult to listen to, thanks to the likes of Spotify and other well-known streaming services. It's easy to find things like this. And what's interesting, we listen to them, it sounds as though it's Dylan, it sounds as though it's Jagger. It was a very successful spoof. The fifth, in 1988, saw the Beach Boys back at number one with Kokomo, and it was 22 years since their previous number one, 1966, Good Vibrations. I must just mention Johnny Horton, pop singer, not an awful lot of people have heard of, around the 1960s. He died in very, very similar circumstances to Hank Williams, the legendary country singer. They both had their final appearance at the Skyline Club in Austin, Texas. They both left the same widow, a lady called Billie Jean, because he'd married her after Hank Williams died. And he was the victim of a drunk driver, Johnny Horton. And Hank Williams, of course, died peacefully in the back of his limousine on the way to, I think it was a New Year's Eve gig somewhere. I mean, he was a victim of a little bit too much drinking, Williams. So you could say that drink killed both of them, really. Always worth listening to people like Johnny Horton. A little bit of
can you
North to Alaska from one of the movies.
Oh, dear, no.
Battle of New Orleans.
Battle of New Orleans.
Well.
Is that the
Lonnie Donegan?
I was going to say, is that the same one Lonnie Donegan
I think
did?
so,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know the Donegan version anyway, very well. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the Louie Louie story. I mean, Louie Louie, one of the most famous, definitely the most famous garage band song of all time.
I was just going to say, because the amount of bands that I saw in the 70s, the pub rock bands, they'd all do this.
Everybody covers it.
They're all doing it.
Absolutely.
I think I've got the, is it the Stranglers doing it?
Yeah.
I'm sure they did it.
Oh, the Kinks did it.
For
generations. On the 30th of November in 1963, the Kingsmen actually took it into the charts, but Berry himself, Richard Berry, wrote it and recorded it with his own band in 1957. But a guy called Rockin' Robin Roberts
what a good name!
Oh, that is
what a good name!
That is
like
a rock and roll man.
Yeah, he's definitely coming around for dinner.
Well, yeah, in March 1961, he actually produced the first garage version. Paul Revere and the Raiders had a version out around the same time as the Kingsmen, but the Kingsmen pipped them to the post. But the sad thing about it, and the interesting thing about the story, is that Richard Berry decided to sell the rights to the song in order to buy a wedding ring because he wanted to get married. I can't remember exactly how much he got, but it was not more than a few $100. And he spent most of the rest of his life fighting a legal battle to get the legal copyrights back, which he did actually achieve shortly before he died. But if you think there are over 2,000 covers of Louie Louie, there are a lot of royalties associated with that. The FBI investigated it with a 118-page report before they decided that it wasn't obscene. And college parties played it all night. Radio stations were known to play the one song all night. And this particular version is the Sonics version, who influenced a load of bands later. And this was released in November 1965.
And can I just say, I promise you, we're only playing it once. Came out in 1965, but believe me, with that sound, that distortion, it could have quite easily have been 1977 or 78, absolutely, something like that. Yeah, and exactly. I'm in a pub in Tooting or somewhere like that in South London, listening to some band who've cranked everything up to number 11, and they're blasting that out. Just wonderful stuff, isn't it?
I mean, Frank Zappa's covered that in parody. So many people have parodied it. There's a great album called it's Best of Louie. It's just Louie Louie versions, and there's one by something like the Wild March Marching Band, Wild Al Marching Band, and that is an amazing version. More birthdays on the November time frame. Ike Turner on the 5th. Mose Allison on the 11th. Mose Allison was the guy that wrote Young Man Blues, the famously covered by The Who on Live at Leeds. And he actually died a couple of days ago, at the age of 89. Berry Gordy Jr., the guy found in Motown we were talking about earlier. And on the 16th in 1956, Harold Jenkins failed his audition at Sun. Well, why are we interested in that? Well, he may have failed his audition at Sun, but he went on to produce sing about 110 albums with 55 number ones, and he changed his name after failing this audition. He looked at a map and he saw Conway in Arkansas and Twitty in Texas, and he thought, Conway Twitty, now there's a name I like. Billy Fury put out his first single in 58 on the 26th, and Robert Johnson, the man that everybody claims to be their first blues hero. He had his first ever recording session in San Antonio, started on the 23rd in 1936. Actually at San Antonio's Gunter Hotel. He used room 414, and the engineer was in the adjoining room in 413. He recorded 16 of his own songs. I'll go through them all. One of them that day was I Believe I'll Dust My Broom, which Elmore James took to great fame in the 50s and on, and Crossroad Blues, which of course Cream and Eric Clapton made rather famous. Others have got great names like their Red Hot Preaching Blues, Last Fair Deal Gone Down, Kind-Hearted Woman Blues. But the one I'm going to listen to is one called Dead Shrimp Blues. And what I love about this, it is your classic blues, where the first line says, I woke up this morning and all my shrimps were dead.
Well, yeah, why not? Why not?
Absolutely.
Well, you don't know. I mean, he might have been living by the seaside when he wrote it.
Fished them all out.
Yeah. You just don't know, do you? Robert Johnson and Dead Shrimp Blues. Robert Johnson and Dead Shrimp Blues. 1936.
1936. He only ever did one more recording session in Dallas on, 19th of June 37. And he recorded another 13, so 29 songs. And to say the guy is famous is a bit of an understatement. So this is the guy that reputedly sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. And there is some dispute as to which crossroads it was.
And how much did he get?
Well, fame and fortune.
Oh, that's what he got for it, wasn't it?
Virtuosity.
Yeah. Well, he certainly got them.
Because it would appear, reading various things about him, that overnight he appeared to go from being yet another all-right blues guy to being a genius. So, who knows? More things in heaven and earth, Horatio. More birthdays, in fact, happened spookily enough, in November. On the 6th, good day for the Eagles, good month for the Eagles. Glenn Frey was born on the 6th in 48, and Joe Walsh, who brought a little bit more of a cutting-edge rock and roll feel to him with Hotel California, was born on the 20th in 47. John Mayall was born on the 29th, and John McVie, his bass guitarist, was born on the 26th. Neil Young was born on the 12th, and not so much a birth, more of a death. Danny Whitten died on the 18th in 1972. He played with Neil Young quite a lot, and he just got back together with Neil Young when he died. And there's a very interesting, the RIAA, who issue all the platinum albums and all the rest of it, they issued on the 10th of November 1999, they decided they'd have a look at the artists of the century. And the Eagles' Greatest Hits, 1971 to 75, became the best-selling album of all time, pushing Michael Jackson's Thriller into a different category, which was best-selling studio album by a solo artist. Elvis had the most gold and platinum albums and singles, and the Beatles, the only act ever with 5 diamond albums, US sales of 10 million copies or more. And those albums are Sgt. Pepper, White Album, and Abbey Road, but interestingly enough, they're 2 big hits albums. The Red Album, the double album, 1962 to 1966, and the Blue Album, as it's known, 1967 to 1970. They're also up there with those massive sellers. NME introduced the first UK singles chart. Al Martino, Here in My Heart, was top of it. And it's one of those days where everyone of a certain age knows where they were, because that's the 22nd of November 1963 was when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Lee Harvey Oswald is the guy that was suspected at the time of doing it. He'd become a member of or an employee of the Texas School Book Depository some weeks before, and that was the building that it's reckoned that some theories, the official theory reckons that the fatal shots were fired from. After the incident, it's well known that Oswald did kill police officer J.T. Tibbett in a shootout. He was arrested, Lee Harvey Oswald, and as he was being transported, or he was being taken from the local jail to be transported elsewhere, Jack Ruby, 2 days later, Jack Ruby shot him. And the conspiracy theories ever since have just been absolutely unbelievable.
Jack Ruby, did he
was executed.
He was? No, I thought...
No, he died in prison.
I thought he died in prison, But he didn't last too long, did he?
He was in prison a long time.
He was,
I think he was arrested in the UK.
Was he really?
I think so. It was a while before they arrested him.
How did he get away?
No, it couldn't have been right, could it?
No. I'm sure they just got him there and then.
Else. Yeah, they did. Because, I mean, he was in a busy crowd and he just shot him. Yeah, he was absolutely right.
I mean, there's a famous footage of him actually, Oswald walking forwards, and Ruby just sort of steps out and bang, bang, and he's dead.
Yeah, he was a local nightclub owner.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of...
I'm thinking of somebody else.
You're thinking of James Earl Ray,
that's
I think, who shot Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I think. I think was arrested in the UK, and he died... I know we're sidetracking here. I think he did die in prison of something like liver cancer or something like that.
Yeah, he was in prison a long time.
And he always maintained his innocence, but hey, who knows?
Well, when you look at some of these conspiracy theories, though, there are some interesting angles in terms of how things could have been not quite the same way as the official ones. But,
I don't know why they don't just admit that the most obvious answer is probably the truth, that the guy did shoot him. Hey, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Thing is, we'll never know.
We'll never know.
It's not a movie. That's the sad thing.
I don't know. They've probably got that, like over here, you have like the 30-year secrecy rule and the 100-year secrecy rule. They've probably got much the same in America, and I guess, probably, years after we've gone, in another 100 years, 200 years' time, somebody will dig up some kind of old file and say, oh, is that what really happened?
Yeah. It'd be nice to know.
It turned out to be a Martian or a Dalek that did it. Who knows?
Exactly. Piece of artificial intelligence. Which brings us nicely on to Led Zeppelin. November was quite an interesting time for them, as well as having on the 9th in 1968 the first concert as Led Zeppelin. Spirit were in the studio on the 9th in 1967, recording tracks for their eponymous first album. And they recorded they didn't actually record on that particular day, but during that series of recordings, they recorded Taurus, which famously was part of the lawsuit with Stairway to Heaven recently that was settled in Led Zeppelin's favour. But that was the 9th, there was one recording session. Certainly on the 12th, 1971, Zeppelin's fourth album was released, which actually contained the said Stairway to Heaven. And they also released A Whole Lot of Love in November, on the 7th in 1969. And a couple of birthdays actually associated with Zeppelin. Chris Stredger, who was in the Yardbirds, who almost transitioned into Led Zeppelin, but didn't quite. He was born on the 11th in 1945. And Terry Reid was born on the 13th in 1949. Now, Terry Reid is the man who famously turned down. He was the first lead vocalist to be offered the job with the newly being formed Led Zeppelin. And he said, no, I've got some good things going on at the moment, lads. Thanks a lot, but why don't you have a chat to my mate Robert Plant? Which he did. Robert Plant said, well, why don't we... They were still looking for a drummer, and Robert Plant said, well, I used to play with this guy called John Bonham, who's pretty good. So John Bonham came into the frame, and Led Zeppelin became Led Zeppelin. And this particular track is off the fourth album. And it's the only Led Zeppelin where Robert Plant did a duet, and this is with Sandy Denny, who replaced Judy Dibble in Fairport Convention. And she'd been with Straubs briefly before, and she left Fairport to form Fotheringay. And this is Battle of Evermore. And November, of course, was an interesting time for the Beatles. I mean, a whole load of Beatles and John Lennon stuff happened. But one or two of the notable things... on the 15th in 1974, Elton John released Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and the American versions of the single on the label say featuring the reggae guitars of Dr. Winston O'Boogie, which of course is John Lennon. And Elton returned the favour and appeared on Lennon's Whatever Gets You Through the Night. And Lennon said to Elton, famously, if Night tops the US charts, I'll appear on stage with you. And so he did. And this was actually Lennon's only number one in his lifetime. So, I mean, Imagine did not catch the imagination until after he died. And, of course, Lucy O'Donnell was the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, famously. And in fact, that last concert with John Lennon was on the 28th of November in 1974. Quick mention for Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher, who was the famous policeman who was made it his job to catch naughty rock and roll stars with drugs. Well, he was arrested and convicted of perjury and perverting the course of justice and all kinds of things that throw a different light on the arrests earlier. Beatles appeared on the 4th in 1963 at the Royal Command Performance, and Brian Epstein met the Beatles for the first time on the 9th of November 1961. Amongst the singles they released, on the 29th, 1963, I Want to Hold Your Hand was their first Christmas number one. And at birthdays, Delbert Clinton, was played harmonica on Bruce Chanel's Hey Baby in 1962. Is credited with being an influence on John Lennon, or John Lennon said he was the influence on him for the harmonica in Love Me Do. And Charles Manson, a birthday you probably don't want to share, on the 12th of November, he was born in 34, and he used, horrible murders, Sharon Tate, and he blamed the Beatles' White Album, and in Blood on the Walls was scrawled words like piggies and references to titles and various tracks on the Beatles' White Album. Pete Best was born on the 24th. Now, on the 13th of November 1964, the Moody Blues released Go Now, and their lead singer was Denny Laine, who later joined Wings, which is the link there. But this is the original version of Go Now by Bessie Banks, and this is from 1964.
Taken from a piece of vinyl. You might notice a slight difference in quality there. Bessie Banks and Go Now. 1964. Oh, you can even hear the little click at the end. Wonderful.
Well, vinyl.
Wonderful.
Analog technology.
And was it an original vinyl?
No, it was a compilation, blues compilation.
Okay.
Oh, no,
right.
Original, that'd be
a while old.
Hung on the wall, framed, I think.
Right.
Brilliant. I mean, coming towards the end now, and Elvis had a couple of interesting things, actually. In 6th of November 54, he did his only radio commercial in Louisiana, during Louisiana Hayride. It was for Southern Made Donuts, a local donut company. And part of the lyric was, get 'em piping hot. And on the 20th in 55, he actually moved from Sun to RCA for the princely sum of $35,000 plus $5,000 in royalties. Because he hadn't really done an awful lot commercially before then. He was building the frame. But as soon as he moved to RCA, he recorded Heartbreak Hotel, and the rest is history, as they say. But it's really an interesting time of firsts. You have things like Jerry Lee's first ever public performance on the 19th in 1949. The Velvet Underground's first gig on the 11th in 1965. And they were very much promoted by Andy Warhol. And one of the first performances they did was as part of Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable, which was Warhol movies in the background. It had dancers, it had lights, and that was a precursor really of a lot of the psychedelic stuff with light shows and movies playing in the background. And just a quick mention, Dave said earlier that the next show's on the 15th, and all of these stories are taken from the book Rock'n'Roll Unravelled, and on the 16th I shall be in the bookshop in East Grinstead signing copies of said book. So if you would like lots of detail about all of these wonderful stories, that would be a good place to have in your diary for the 16th of December. And really starts to bring us to Bruce Springsteen. On the 18th of November 1975, he was over for his European debut at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I lived in London at the time. And I remember seeing these posters, and he'd cracked America, but he'd come over here now to crack Europe. And the poster said, finally, the world is ready for Bruce Springsteen. Well, it wasn't really. And he got very, very mixed reviews for those. Difficult to believe it now, but he got very, very mixed reviews for those particular opening concerts. He made up for it. I mean, the guy is an absolute legend. And one of the other birthdays on the 22nd, 1950, was Stevie Van Zandt, the guitarist. And this is actually a Warren Zevon song from Bruce Springsteen, mellow Springsteen to round the evening off. My Ride's Here.
My Ride's Here by Bruce Springsteen. I'll be back next week, and just for a 2-hour show, because, of course, next week is the anniversary of Freddie Mercury's death. So Guy Bellamy's sitting in from 10 o'clock to do a 1-hour special on Freddie Mercury. But it still will be me from 8 o'clock until 10 o'clock. Thanks very much to Derek for tonight, for coming in. See you next week, next month, I should say, when we do Guitar Heroes. And I will be back next week. Thanks very much for listening.
My pleasure. Cheers, mate.
Taking us up to the 11 o'clock news, a bit of Bruce Springsteen.